The Barrett M82A1 sat on the bench like a sleeping predator, 30 pounds of precision-engineered death, capable of punching through engine blocks at 1.5 miles. Bradley Morrison picked it up with practiced ease, his thick forearms barely registering the weight as he turned to address the dozen students gathered at Montana Precision Rifle Academy. "This weapon," he announced, his voice carrying across the range with the authority of someone who'd never been questioned, "requires upper body strength that 99% of civilians don't possess. The recoil will break your shoulder if you don't know what you're doing." He set the rifle down with deliberate care, then gestured toward the slight figure standing at the back of the group. Lily Dawson, 5'3" and maybe 115 pounds, wearing an oversized fleece jacket and carrying a notebook like she was attending a lecture, not a precision rifle course. "Ma'am," Bradley said, loading the word with condescension, "this isn't a beginner's class. The 50 cal isn't something you work up to, it's something you earn." He exchanged glances with Flynn Rodriguez, who was already smirking. "Maybe try the AR-15 course first. Build some fundamentals." Lily said nothing. She simply adjusted her glasses and made a note in her book. Instructor Derek Sanders stepped forward, his weathered face betraying decades of military service. "Morrison's right. We've had grown men leave here with bruised shoulders and hurt pride. This weapon doesn't forgive mistakes." He looked at Lily with what might have been concern or might have been dismissal. "Are you sure you want to be here?" Lily's response was quiet, almost lost in the Montana wind. "I'm sure." What none of them knew was that in exactly 47 minutes, everything they believed about strength, skill, and who deserved to hold a Barrett 50 cal was about to be shattered. Lily stood off to the side as Bradley continued his demonstration, watching him handle the massive rifle with exaggerated confidence. Her eyes tracked every movement with an intensity that would have alarmed anyone paying attention. The way he gripped the stock was too tight. His cheek weld wasn't consistent. And when he adjusted the bipod legs, he failed to lock them properly, a mistake that would throw off accuracy at distance. She cataloged these errors automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours behind similar weapons, recognizing fundamental flaws that Bradley seemed completely unaware of. The morning Montana air carried the sharp scent of gun oil and mountain pine. Around her, the other students hung on Bradley's every word, like he was revealing sacred mysteries instead of basic principles that anyone with proper training would consider elementary. Flynn Rodriguez stood beside him, arms crossed, nodding along with the kind of self-satisfaction that came from believing you were among the elite. "The Barrett 50 cal fires a round traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, Bradley continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor lecturing particularly dim students. "At 1,000 meters, you're dealing with bullet drop exceeding 30 feet, wind drift that can push your shot 6 feet off target, and the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation." He paused for dramatic effect. "This is graduate-level physics combined with physical strength most people simply don't have." Several students nodded seriously, impressed by the technical jargon. Lily made another note in her book, this time suppressing the urge to correct his math. The Coriolis effect at 1,000 meters was negligible in most shooting scenarios. Focusing on it was the mark of someone who'd read about long-range shooting, but hadn't actually done much of it under combat conditions where simpler fundamentals mattered far more. "All right, introductions," Derek announced, pulling out a clipboard. "Let's go around the circle. Name, background, and what you're hoping to get from this course." Bradley went first, naturally. Bradley Morrison, 12 years Army infantry, multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. "I'm here to master the 50 cal because it's the ultimate expression of precision marksmanship." Several students looked at him with clear admiration. Flynn was next. Flynn Rodriguez, 8 years Marine Corps, Scout Sniper School graduate. "Looking to add the Barrett to my skill set and maybe pick up some teaching techniques." His eyes swept at the group, lingering on Lily with barely concealed amusement. One by one, the students introduced themselves. Connor Hayes, a young man barely out of his teens, spoke about following in his grandfather's military footsteps. Mason Wright, a weathered man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who had seen real action, kept his introduction brief and professional. Then it was Lily's turn. "Lily Dawson," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying past the first row. "IT specialist. First time with rifles." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt longer. Then Flynn let out a short laugh that he tried unsuccessfully to disguise as a cough. Bradley's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. Even some of the other students exchanged skeptical glances. First time with rifles, Bradley repeated slowly, as if he had misheard. And you chose to start with a Barrett 50 cal. Is that a problem? Lily asked, her tone genuinely curious rather than defensive. Ma'am, that's like learning to drive in a Formula One car, Flynn interjected, his professional courtesy unable to mask his disbelief. The 50 cal is an expert's weapon. Most shooters spend years working up to it. Derek cleared his throat. Ms. Dawson, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but maybe Flynn's right. We offer excellent courses in smaller calibers that would give you a foundation before attempting something this advanced. Before Lily could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation. Is there a problem here? Everyone turned to see a woman in expensive athletic wear approaching the group, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that probably cost more to maintain than most people's monthly grocery budget. Amber Mitchell, wife of Colonel Richard Mitchell from the nearby Air Force Base, was a regular presence at the range despite never actually shooting much. She preferred to socialize, network, and, as became immediately clear, pass judgment. Amber, Derek acknowledged, with the careful politeness reserved for difficult customers who happened to be married to important people. We're just doing introductions. Amber's gaze swept over Lily with the kind of assessment that managed to be both quick and thorough. Another one trying to prove something, she said to her companion, a similarly dressed woman whose name no one ever seemed to remember. Her voice wasn't particularly quiet. They see it on TV and think it looks empowering. Then reality hits. Lily's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Her weight settled more evenly on both feet, her shoulders squared by perhaps a centimeter. To most observers, she still looked like a nervous civilian about to be in over her head. But Mason Wright, standing several yards away, noticed the change. His eyes narrowed slightly, professional instinct recognizing something he couldn't quite name. Bradley distributed safety equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. When he handed Lily a set of ear protection and safety glasses, he added unsolicited advice. These might not be enough for someone your size. The concussive blast from a 50 cal can be disorienting even with proper protection. Don't be embarrassed if you need to step back. Thank you, Lily replied, her politeness so genuine it was almost painful to witness. She accepted the equipment without argument, though anyone with experience would have noticed the ear protection was actually several sizes too large for her, hanging loosely rather than sealing properly. The group moved to the firing line, a covered position overlooking the range that stretched out into the Montana wilderness. Target boards dotted the landscape at measured intervals, 100 meters, 300, 500, and further out, barely visible to the naked eye, the 1,000-meter markers that separated casual shooters from serious practitioners. Before anyone fires the Barrett, Derek announced, I want to see baseline performance with something more manageable. We'll start with AR-15s at 100 meters. Show me you can handle fundamentals before we move to the big gun. This was standard procedure, but the way he looked at Lily when he said it made clear who the policy was really designed to protect. Several students began setting up their rifles, competitive energy rippling through the group as everyone tried to establish their position in the informal hierarchy that formed in any gathering of shooters. During the lunch break that followed the initial safety briefing, the students scattered around the range's covered eating area. Connor Hayes approached Lily with the well-meaning condescension of someone who'd grown up being told to help those less fortunate. Hey, I noticed you're new to all this, he said, gesturing at her minimal equipment. I've got some spare shooting gloves if you need them. The recoil can tear up your hands if you're not used to it. Lily looked up from the technical manual she'd been reading, a dense text about ballistic coefficients that most recreational shooters would find impenetrably boring. That's kind of you, but I'll be fine. No, really, Connor insisted, misreading her polite refusal as shy reluctance. There's no shame in accepting help. Everyone here started somewhere. Connor, Mason Wright's voice carried from a nearby table, maybe let the lady make her own choices. Connor retreated, slightly embarrassed, while Mason returned his attention to his own meal, but not before catching Lily's brief nod of acknowledgement, a gesture so subtle it could have been mistaken for coincidence, if not for the precise military bearing behind it. Before we continue with what happened next on that Montana rifle range, we want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this story unfold? Drop your location in the comments below. And if stories about underestimated heroes proving everyone wrong speak to you, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't believe what Lily Dawson is about to reveal, and trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when that Barrett 50 cal tells the truth these men refuse to see. Flynn Rodriguez spent the lunch break holding court at the center table, sharing war stories with the kind of detail that suggested they'd been refined through multiple retellings. The shot that earned me my scout sniper designation was at 740 meters, he explained to a rapt audience. Target was moving laterally through heavy vegetation. Wind was gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour. I had to lead the target by approximately 4 feet to account for movement and bullet flight time. Bradley chimed in with his own story, something involving a machine gun nest and superior firepower overcoming inferior tactical positioning. The stories had the polished quality of anecdotes repeated so often they'd calcified into personal mythology, each retelling smoothing away complications or doubts until only heroic certainty remained. Lily remained apart from these conversations, sitting alone near the edge of the covered area, where she had a clear view of the range. She'd produced a small notebook and was making calculations, her pen moving with the quick confidence of someone working through familiar equations. At one point, she glanced up at the wind flags positioned at intervals down the range, observing how they shifted and changed, noting the patterns that would matter at distance. "She's actually studying," Amber Mitchell said to her companion, loud enough to carry. "Like cramming before a test will help when physics and reality take over. It's almost adorable how hard she's trying." The afternoon session began with AR-15 baseline shooting at 100 meters. Derek established strict safety protocols, then had each student step up to demonstrate basic competence. Bradley went first, naturally, grouping his shots in a respectable 4-inch circle. Flynn followed with a tighter 3-inch group, earning approving nods from the instructor. Connor, for all his youthful enthusiasm, struggled with fundamentals, his group spreading over 7 inches as he fought to control breathing and trigger press. Mason Wright, when his turn came, put 5 rounds into a 2-inch circle with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd done this under significantly more stressful conditions than a Montana rifle range. Then Derek called Lily's name. She approached the firing line with the same quiet demeanor she'd maintained all day, her movements economical rather than hesitant. Bradley and Flynn exchanged glances that clearly communicated their expectations for this performance. Even Connor, still embarrassed by his own mediocre showing, watched with the anticipation of someone hoping to see their own struggles validated by another's failure. Lily settled behind the rifle, and something changed. Her body seemed to relax into the position rather than fighting it, each limb finding its natural place with the kind of ease that came from profound familiarity. She adjusted the stock slightly, checked the scope with a quick glance, then settled her cheek against the rest with the precise consistency that separated amateurs from professionals. Mason Wright leaned forward almost imperceptibly, his attention suddenly focused with laser intensity on the woman at the firing line. Lily's first shot broke clean, the report sharp in the afternoon air. Before the echo faded, she'd cycled the bolt and fired again. 5 shots in maybe 10 seconds, each one flowing into the next with mechanical precision. She cleared the weapon, engaged the safety, and stood up, her expression unchanged. Derek walked downrange with the spotting scope to examine the target. He spent longer than usual studying it, then called back to the line. Dead center, all 5 shots in a half-inch group. The silence that followed was profound. Flynn's jaw actually went slack for a moment before he recovered. Bradley's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been anger. Connor just stared, his understanding of what was possible clearly being recalibrated. Amber Mitchell had stopped mid-sentence in her conversation, her expression frozen in the middle of what had probably been another dismissive comment. "Beginner's luck," Bradley finally said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried all morning. "At 100 meters with a scoped AR, that's basically point and shoot. Let's see how she does when distance and wind come into play." But his rationalization sounded hollow even to himself, and everyone knew it. 100 meters might be relatively close, but putting 5 rapid shots into a half-inch group required fundamentals that beginners simply didn't possess, luck or no luck. Derek increased the challenge. 300 meters. Wind is picking up, gusting from the northwest. This is where theory meets reality. Bradley stepped up first, his movements less assured than they'd been before lunch. He took his time, clearly feeling the pressure to perform after Lily's unexpected showing. His group measured 4 inches, respectable by most standards, but nothing extraordinary. Wind shifted on my last shot, he explained, though no one had asked. Flynn approached the line with visible determination, clearly intent on re-establishing his position as the technical expert. He spent nearly 3 minutes setting up, adjusting his position multiple times, checking and rechecking his scope settings. His group measured 3 inches, better than Bradley's, but achieved with an amount of preparation that bordered on excessive. "That's how it's done," Flynn announced, more to himself than anyone else. Patience, precision, and proper technique. When Lily's turn came, she approached the firing line with the same unhurried pace. But this time, she paused before settling into position, pulling out her small notebook and making quick calculations. Mason Wright shifted position to get a better view of what she was writing, and his expression changed from curiosity to something approaching alarm. Lily was using mil-dot ranging formulas, not the simplified versions taught in civilian courses, but the full military calculations that accounted for multiple variables simultaneously. Her math flowed across the page with the practiced ease of someone who'd done these calculations under significantly worse conditions than a pleasant Montana afternoon. "Where did you learn that?" Mason asked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the range. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised by the intensity in his question. Lily glanced up from her notebook, her eyes meeting his for perhaps the first time all day. "Books," she said simply, then returned her attention to her calculations. It wasn't exactly a lie. She had learned from books, among other things. What she didn't mention was that those books had been classified military field manuals, and the learning had taken place under the instruction of some of the finest snipers in U.S. military history during training that 99% of applicants failed to complete. She folded the notebook away, settled behind the rifle, and made several small adjustments to her position that most observers wouldn't notice. Mason noticed. He saw how she used the natural features of the terrain to shield herself from the variable wind. He observed how her breathing pattern shifted, becoming slower and more controlled. He recognized the specific cant she applied to the rifle to compensate for the slope angle. 5 shots, each one placed with the same calm deliberation as the first, no rush, no hesitation, just smooth mechanical execution of practiced technique. When Derek walked down to check the target, he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at the grouping, then looked back at Lily with an expression that suggested his entire understanding of the situation was undergoing radical revision. 1 inch, he finally called out. All 5 shots within 1 inch at 300 meters in variable wind. Precision shooting demands more than just skill. It requires perfect vision, steady hands, and the kind of focus that comes from optimal health. Professional marksmen understand that maintaining peak physical condition isn't optional, whether it's specialized eye care to track targets at extreme distances, supplements that support hand-eye coordination, or medical monitoring to ensure your body can handle the physical demands of sustained shooting positions. Investing in your health is investing in your performance. The difference between a good shot and a perfect shot often comes down to how well you've taken care of the machine operating the weapon, your body. The atmosphere on the range had shifted from casual instruction to something else entirely. Connor Hayes stood slightly apart from Bradley and Flynn, his earlier eagerness to be part of their club replaced by confused uncertainty. Amber Mitchell had gone quiet, her usual commentary dried up in the face of evidence that didn't fit her narrative. Even Derek Sanders, with decades of military experience, found himself reassessing assumptions he'd held since Lily first walked onto his range. 500 meters, Derek announced, his professional curiosity now fully engaged. At this distance, we're dealing with significant bullet drop, wind drift across multiple air currents, and the limits of most shooters' ability to judge conditions accurately. This is where equipment and skill both get tested. Bradley declined to shoot. "These conditions aren't ideal," he said, gesturing vaguely at wind flags that weren't actually behaving any differently than they had all afternoon. No point wasting ammunition when the environmental factors are this variable. It was a face-saving retreat, and everyone recognized it as such. Flynn, however, stepped up with the grim determination of someone defending their professional reputation. He spent nearly 5 minutes setting up, using increasingly sophisticated equipment to measure wind speed, temperature, and even barometric pressure. His preparation was thorough, professional, and ultimately insufficient. 2 of his 5 shots hit the target. 3 sailed wide, victims of wind drift he'd either miscalculated or failed to anticipate. The wind shifted, he explained, his face flushed. You can see how it's gusting inconsistently. At this distance, that makes precision nearly impossible unless you get lucky with timing. He wasn't entirely wrong. 500 meters in variable wind was genuinely challenging, and his explanation was technically sound. But it still felt like excuse-making, because everyone was waiting to see what the quiet IT specialist would do with the same conditions. Lily approached the line and produced her notebook again. This time, several students leaned closer, trying to see what she was writing. Her calculations filled half a page, dense mathematical relationships between variables that most shooters simplified with ballistic calculators or just ignored in favor of Kentucky windage, the art of eyeballing adjustments based on experience. Mason Wright had positioned himself where he could see her work clearly. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he recognized formulas he'd only seen in one context: military sniper training materials that weren't available to civilians under any normal circumstances. The specific method she used for calculating wind drift across varying distances wasn't taught in books or classes. It was institutional knowledge, passed from instructor to student in programs that most people didn't even know existed. That's military calculation methodology, Mason said quietly. Not quite a question, but not quite a statement either. Lily finished writing, closed her notebook, and finally looked at him directly. I read a lot, she said, her tone unchanged. This story is just getting started, and the reveal that you're waiting for is coming. But first, if you're enjoying this journey of watching assumptions crumble under the weight of truth, take 2 seconds to like this video. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. Now, back to Montana, where the real test is about to begin. She settled behind the rifle with movements that had become noticeably less tentative as the day progressed. Or perhaps they had never been tentative at all, and only seemed that way because everyone had assumed incompetence from the beginning. Her breathing slowed, each inhale and exhale measured with the precision of someone who'd trained respiratory control until it became autonomic. 5 shots. The first one came after a pause of maybe 20 seconds, while she waited for something no one else seemed to notice. The second followed 10 seconds later. The third, fourth, and fifth came in a tighter sequence, each one placed during what must have been brief windows in the wind pattern that only she could read. Derek walked down to the target, and this time he didn't bother with the spotting scope first. He just stood there looking at it for a long moment before calling back. All 5 shots, half-inch group. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't surprise anymore. This was people beginning to understand that they were witnessing something they didn't have the context to properly evaluate. Connor's face had shifted from skepticism to outright awe. Amber Mitchell looked like someone who'd just realized they'd been insulting a celebrity without recognizing them. Even Derek seemed uncertain about how to proceed, his lesson plan clearly not accounting for a student who could outshoot him at distance. Flynn stood rigid, his face cycling through emotions too complex to name. Bradley had moved away from the group slightly, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular, with an expression that suggested his entire understanding of the world was being forcibly recalibrated. Only Mason Wright seemed unsurprised, though troubled. He moved closer to Derek and spoke quietly, words the other students couldn't hear, but that made the instructor's eyes widen slightly before he glanced at Lily with new speculation. I think, Derek said carefully, his voice pitched to carry to the entire group, that we need to reassess our assumptions about today's class. Ms. Dawson, would you mind if I asked you a few questions about your background? Before Lily could respond, Flynn interjected with the sharp tone of someone whose professional identity was crumbling. Who are you? The question came out more aggressively than he probably intended. Nobody shoots like that with no rifle experience. What are you really doing here? Lily met his gaze with the same calm expression she'd maintained all day. I told you, IT specialist. First time at this range. That's not an answer, Flynn pressed. First time at this range isn't the same as first time with rifles. You're using military calculation methods. Your shooting position is textbook for long-range precision work, and I've never seen anyone read wind conditions that accurately outside of combat veterans. Maybe I'm just a good student, Lily replied, her tone pleasant but offering nothing. You all gave very thorough explanations this morning. Bradley moved back into the group, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by something harder. Nobody learns sniper-level technique from a morning briefing. You're playing some kind of game here, and I don't appreciate it. Game? Lily tilted her head slightly. genuine confusion in her voice. "I paid the same registration fee as everyone else. I'm following all the range rules. I'm just trying to learn." "Learn," Flynn repeated, loading the word with skepticism. "At 500 meters in variable wind, you just put 5 shots into a group tighter than most military marksmen could achieve. That's not learning. That's demonstrating mastery." The confrontation was drawing attention from other areas of the range. Ethan Cole, the gunsmith who maintained weapons for the facility, wandered over with the casual curiosity of someone sensing drama. Dr. Grace Foster, a retired military doctor who came to the range occasionally for stress relief, looked up from cleaning her pistol at a nearby bench. Even old Jasper, the range maintenance worker who usually kept to himself, had paused his work to observe. "Maybe," Lily suggested quietly, "you're all just used to people who haven't taken this as seriously as I have. I studied the theory extensively before coming here. I practiced visualization exercises. I took it seriously because I wanted to do it right." It was a reasonable explanation, plausible even, and it might have satisfied the group if not for one detail that Mason Wright had noticed during her last shooting sequence. When Lily had been waiting for wind conditions, she had unconsciously touched her left shoulder, her fingers tracing a pattern under her jacket. The gesture had lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Mason recognized it. He'd seen it before, in other shooters, other contexts. It was a habit formed by wearing tactical gear so often that you automatically checked for equipment that wasn't there anymore. "Ms. Dawson," Mason said, his voice cutting through the rising argument, "may I ask you something personal?" Lily turned to face him, wariness finally showing in her expression. "That depends on the question." "Your shoulder," Mason continued, ignoring the confused looks from the other students. "You touched it just before your last shooting sequence. May I ask if you have an old injury there?" The question seemed innocuous to most listeners, but Lily's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and suddenly there was something new in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but recognition. She understood that Mason had seen something others had missed, and she was calculating how to respond. "Everyone gets aches," she said carefully. "Probably slept wrong." "Probably," Mason agreed, his tone neutral, but his eyes told a different story. He knew she was lying. More importantly, he knew that she knew he knew, and there was an entire conversation happening in the subtext that no one else in the group could follow. Derek cleared his throat, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled well beyond standard instruction protocols. "I think we should move on to the Barrett demonstration. That's what everyone paid for after all." The mention of the Barrett 50 cal shifted attention away from Lily momentarily. Connor perked up, excited despite his confusion about the day's events. Even Bradley and Flynn seemed to rally, seeing the Barrett as their chance to re-establish dominance in their areas of supposed expertise. But as the group began moving toward where the massive rifle waited, Ethan Cole called out from the gunsmith station, "Hey, Sanders, you might want to check out her hand." Everyone turned. Ethan was pointing at Lily's right hand, which she'd been using to adjust her rifle. In the afternoon light, with her sleeve pulled back slightly from repeated shooting positions, something was visible that hadn't been obvious before. Calluses. Not the soft bumps that recreational shooters developed, but the deep, hardened tissue that came from thousands of hours of repeated pressure in very specific locations. The pad of her trigger finger, the web between thumb and forefinger where recoil concentrated, the edge of her palm where it rested against rifle stocks. "Those aren't beginner's calluses," Ethan said, his professional expertise identifying something he recognized from decades of working with serious shooters. "Those take years to develop, thousands of rounds at minimum." Lily looked at her own hand as if seeing it for the first time, though her expression suggested she knew exactly what Ethan was pointing out. "I do a lot of work with my hands," she offered. "8 equipment can be physically demanding." "Not like that it isn't," Ethan replied, not unkindly, but firmly. "Those are shooter's calluses, specific pressure points that match precision rifle work. You don't get those from keyboard typing." The evidence was accumulating now, pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit the picture Lily had presented: the shooting ability, the military calculations, the muscle memory, the calluses. Each element alone might be explainable, but together they suggested something that no one in the group wanted to say out loud, because the implications were too strange. Dr. Grace Foster had moved closer during the exchange, her medical training making her naturally observant of physical details others missed. "May I?" she asked Lily, gesturing toward her hands. When Lily hesitantly extended them, Grace examined the calluses with professional thoroughness. These show scarring patterns consistent with repetitive trauma over extended periods. We're talking years of regular use, not recent hobby acquisition. And look here, she indicated Lily's shoulder, visible now through the shift in her jacket. There's slight asymmetric muscle development. The right shoulder is more developed than the left, in a pattern I've seen in military marksmen who spend extensive time in shooting positions. I work out, Lily said, her explanations growing thinner with each revelation. Specifically training muscle groups used in prone shooting positions, Grace asked skeptically. That's a very specialized workout routine for someone who's never handled rifles before. The group had unconsciously formed a circle around Lily now, their collective energy shifting from instruction to interrogation. Connor looked uncertain, caught between his earlier condescension and growing realization that he had badly misjudged the situation. Amber Mitchell had gone pale, clearly doing mental calculations about all the dismissive comments she'd made throughout the day. Bradley and Flynn stood side by side, united in defensive confusion, both men feeling their expertise challenged by a woman they'd written off as incompetent. "Look," Lily said, her voice taking on an edge for the first time all day, "I don't understand why this is such a big deal. I came here to learn. I'm paying for instruction just like everyone else. If my performance is better than expected, shouldn't that be a good thing?" "It would be," Derek replied, "if it made sense. But nothing about today makes sense, Ms. Dawson. You show up claiming no rifle experience, then demonstrate skills that exceed most of my advanced students. You use calculation methods that aren't taught in civilian courses. You have physical conditioning specific to precision shooting, and you're being evasive when we ask direct questions about your background." "I'm being private about personal information," Lily corrected. "That's not the same as being evasive." "The hell it isn't," Bradley interjected, his frustration breaking through his earlier restraint. "You made us all look like fools. You sat there this morning, quiet as a mouse, letting us explain basics to you like you'd never held a weapon. Then you outshoot everyone here like it's nothing. That's not being private. That's being deceptive." "I never claimed to be incompetent," Lily replied, her calm finally showing cracks. "You all assumed that based on my appearance. I didn't correct your assumptions because, honestly, it wasn't my responsibility to manage your expectations." The accusation hit harder because it was true. Bradley, Flynn, Derek, Amber, even Connor in his way, they had all looked at Lily and made instant judgments based on her size, her gender, her quiet demeanor. She'd never actually said she couldn't shoot. She'd just let them believe it, and they'd been eager to do so. "So, this was what?" Flynn demanded. "Some kind of setup? Come in here pretending to be a novice so you could embarrass us?" "No," Lily said firmly. "I came here because I needed to face something I have been avoiding. That's personal, and it's none of your business. The fact that you all chose to underestimate me before I'd fired a single shot says more about your prejudices than it does about any deception on my part. Modern precision shooting has evolved far beyond iron sights and gut feelings. Today's elite marksmen rely on advanced technology to achieve impossible shots. High-end rangefinders that calculate distance with laser precision, ballistic computers that factor in wind speed, temperature, altitude, and even the Coriolis effect, thermal imaging devices that see what the naked eye cannot. Professional-grade tablets running specialized software can predict bullet trajectory within fractions of an inch at distances exceeding a mile. The equipment is expensive, but when accuracy matters, technology isn't a luxury, it's a requirement. The best shooters don't just train harder, they train smarter with tools that give them every possible advantage. The tension hung in the air like the gun smoke that still drifted across the range. Then Sheriff Logan Bennett's patrol car pulled into the parking area, his routine visit to check range permits happening at the worst possible time. Or perhaps the best possible time, depending on perspective. Logan had been sheriff for 15 years and had developed an instinct for when situations at the range were moving from challenging to potentially problematic. He approached the group with the easy authority of someone comfortable with conflict resolution. "Afternoon, Derek. Everything all right here?" "Sheriff," Derek acknowledged, relief and concern mixing in his voice. "We're having a situation that's more confused than dangerous, but I wouldn't mind an outside perspective." Logan looked over the assembled students, his experienced eyes cataloging tensions and positions with practiced efficiency. His gaze lingered on Lily for a moment, noting how everyone else had unconsciously positioned themselves around her in a pattern that suggested confrontation, rather than conversation. What kind of situation? Logan asked. Before Derek could answer, Flynn spoke up. We have someone here who's been misleading us about her qualifications. She claimed to be a beginner, but she's clearly had extensive training. We're trying to understand who she really is and what she's doing here. Logan turned his full attention to Lily. Ma'am, is there a safety concern? Has anyone been endangered? No, Sheriff, Lily replied, her composure returning now that law enforcement had arrived. I've followed all range rules and safety protocols. I paid for a course and I'm participating in it. Some people are upset that my performance exceeded their expectations. She's dodging the question, Bradley interjected. We're trying to find out her real background, and she's being deliberately vague. Is that illegal? Lily asked Logan directly. Am I required to provide my complete personal history to participate in a civilian shooting course? Logan considered the question with the careful thought of someone who understood that legal rights and social expectations didn't always align. No, ma'am, you're not. Unless there's evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation or safety violations, you're within your rights to privacy. But Sheriff, Derek tried, she's using military training methods. Don't we have a right to know if she's active military or law enforcement? Do you require military status disclosure for registration? Logan asked. Well, no, but then no, you don't have that right, Logan concluded. Look, folks, I understand everyone's confused, but confusion isn't a legal issue. If Mrs. Dawson is following range rules and hasn't misrepresented anything official, then this is between you all and doesn't require law enforcement intervention. The sheriff's practical assessment deflated some of the confrontational energy, but it didn't resolve the fundamental questions driving the conflict. Mason Wright, who'd been quiet during the escalation, finally spoke up again. Sheriff, with respect, I think there's more here than confusion. He turned to Lily. Ma'am, I served 22 years in the Marines. I did 3 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I've worked with some of the finest shooters this country has ever produced. And I'm telling you right now, the techniques I've watched you demonstrate today aren't just advanced. They're specific to military sniper training. The calculations, the breathing patterns, the way you read wind conditions, even how you touch your shoulder before shooting, those aren't things you learn from books. Lily held his gaze, and something passed between them, an understanding between people who'd lived experiences that others couldn't fully comprehend. What do you want me to say? She asked quietly. The truth would be nice, Mason replied, not unkindly, because if you're who I think you might be, then everyone here owes you an apology, and if you're not, then we deserve to understand what's really happening. What do you think I am? Lily asked, though her tone suggested she already knew his theory. Mason hesitated, clearly weighing his words carefully. I think you're someone with professional military training and precision marksmanship. I think you've seen combat. And I think you came here today not because you needed to learn, but because you needed to remember something you've been trying to forget. The accuracy of his assessment showed in Lily's expression. For the first time all day, her careful composure cracked visibly. Her jaw tightened, her eyes grew distant, and her right hand moved unconsciously to her left shoulder again, that same pattern-tracing gesture that Mason had noticed before. I came here, Lily said slowly, each word chosen with visible effort, because the last time I held a Barrett 50 cal, someone I cared about died. I thought if I could face that weapon again in a safe environment, maybe I could start processing what happened. But apparently I can't do that without everyone demanding explanations I'm not ready to give. The confession changed everything. The anger that had been building dissipated, replaced by uncomfortable awareness that they'd been pushing someone dealing with trauma. Connor looked stricken, his youthful assumptions about military service colliding with ugly reality. Dr. Grace's expression shifted to professional concern, recognizing PTSD markers she'd dealt with in numerous veterans. Even Bradley and Flynn seemed to deflate, their defensive anger no longer having a clear target. Ma'am, Derek said quietly, if you'd told us that from the beginning, you would have treated me like broken glass, Lily interrupted. Everyone does once they know. I wanted one day where people saw me as competent rather than damaged. Apparently, that was too much to ask. Amber Mitchell had been silent for several minutes. Her earlier commentary dried up in the face of genuine human struggle. Now she spoke, her voice smaller than before. I said some unkind things today. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. You didn't want to understand, Lily corrected, but without heat. You wanted to feel superior, and I was a convenient target. That's not unusual. It just gets exhausting. Mason Wright moved closer, his body language shifting from investigative to protective. Ma'am, you don't owe these people anything, but speaking as someone who's been where you are, running from things only works for so long. Eventually you have to face them, and if that's what you're trying to do today, then you have my respect. Lily looked at him, recognition passing between two people who'd walked similar paths. How did you know? You're breathing, Mason explained. Before that 500-meter shot, you did a 4-count box breath. That's combat stress management technique. Nobody teaches that in civilian courses. And the way you waited for the wind, you weren't guessing. You were reading patterns like someone who's had to make that exact judgment under significantly worse conditions. Ramadi, Lily said quietly, the single word carrying weight that most of the group couldn't understand, but Mason clearly did. October 2016. Mason's face went pale. His mouth opened, then closed. He seemed to be struggling with something enormous, some realization that he couldn't quite voice. Finally, he managed the rescue mission. 30 Marines pinned down by ISIS fighters in a building complex. Lily nodded, her expression distant. 3,200 meters, wind gusting between 15 and 22 miles per hour, temperature dropping as the sun set, and a timer counting down because those Marines didn't have much longer. Understanding crashed over Mason like a physical force. His hand went to his chest, fingers finding something under his shirt. When he pulled out a chain necklace, there was a worn coin hanging from it. Challenge coins were common in military circles, personalized markers of unit membership and significant events. But this one was different, hand-engraved, personal rather than official. You, Mason breathed, you're Ghost 7. The name meant nothing to most of the assembled group. Connor looked confused. Bradley and Flynn exchanged glances that suggested they'd heard the designation but couldn't place it. Amber just looked lost. But Derek Sanders, with his decades of military service, suddenly stood straighter. Sheriff Logan's hand moved unconsciously toward his chest in a gesture that suggested respect, or perhaps an aborted salute. I don't know what that means, Connor said, voicing what most were thinking. Mason didn't take his eyes off Lily. October 7th, 2016, Ramadi. I was a gunnery sergeant with 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. My platoon of 30 Marines got pinned down during a clearing operation that went sideways. ISIS fighters had us trapped in a building with no cover and were moving in to finish us. We were calling in anything, air support, artillery, whatever could help. But the building complex was in the middle of civilian infrastructure. We couldn't get close air support without risking massive collateral damage. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Then someone from Special Operations Command got on the radio. Didn't give a name, just a call sign. Ghost 7. Asked us to mark our exact position and give intel on the enemy commander's location. We did. Then Ghost 7 said to stay low and mark targets with strobes because a shot was coming. The range had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Montana wilderness holding its breath as Mason continued. 3,200 meters away, Ghost 7 was set up on a rooftop with a Barrett 50 cal. That's nearly 2 miles. At that distance, you're dealing with bullet drop exceeding 400 feet. Massive wind drift, Coriolis effect, even humidity variations. It should have been an impossible shot. But 18 seconds after the call, the enemy commander dropped. One shot. Perfect placement. The whole assault collapsed immediately. We got extracted with 0 additional casualties. Mason's eyes were wet now, years of carried gratitude finally finding its target. 30 Marines went home to their families that night because Ghost 7 made an impossible shot under conditions that should have guaranteed failure. They gave all of us these coins afterward, he held up the engraved token, from the sniper team that saved our lives. But we never knew who Ghost 7 actually was. The mission was classified. The operators stayed anonymous. He looked at Lily with an expression that blended reverence and disbelief. It was you. All this time, Ghost 7 was you. Lily's careful composure finally shattered. Tears tracked down her face, silent but unmistakable. My spotter, she said quietly. His name was Marcus. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen. That was his last mission. 3 weeks later, we were on another operation when an IED hit our position. He died covering my extraction. So, yes, 30 Marines went home to their families, but Marcus didn't. The name sparked recognition in Mason's face. Chen, we heard about that. The whole battalion did. He got a silver star posthumously. He deserved more, Lily said. He was the best spotter in the unit. The Ramadi shot was as much his as mine. He called the wind. He calculated the trajectory adjustments. I just pulled the trigger. That's not how I heard it, a new voice interjected. Everyone turned to see Jasper, the old range maintenance worker, standing a respectful distance away. His weathered face held an expression that suggested he had heard more than anyone realized. Ghost 7 was legendary in the sniper community. The Ramadi shot wasn't your first long-range success. It was just the most public because those Marines survived to tell the story. Lily looked at him with confusion and wariness. How do you know that? Jasper smiled slightly. Because I served with Ghost Unit 3 in Afghanistan, 2014. Different theater, different unit, but we all knew about Ghost 7. You were the one they held up as the standard, the operator who never missed when it mattered, the one who made impossible shots and then disappeared back into the shadows. He pulled up his shirt sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo, a ghost skull with the number 3 inside it, identical in design to the marking Mason had glimpsed on Lily's shoulder earlier. We all got the same ink. Different numbers, same unit identity. I recognized your shooting technique this morning, the way you check equipment, the 4-count breathing, the specific way you settle into position. Those are Ghost Unit signatures. Bradley Morrison, who'd been silent throughout these revelations, finally found his voice. Ghost Unit? I heard rumors, Special Activities Division stuff, deep black operations that officially don't exist. They don't exist, Jasper confirmed, at least not in any records you will ever see. Small teams, highly specialized, doing work that can't be acknowledged and can't fail. Ghost 7, he nodded to Lily, was one of the finest snipers we ever fielded. There are people alive today who don't know why they're alive, because Ghost 7 eliminated threats they never even knew existed. The weight of this information settled over the group. Connor Hayes looked at Lily with an expression that had moved beyond awe into something approaching reverence. Dr. Grace Foster's professional assessment had shifted entirely, now seeing the trauma markers with new understanding. Sheriff Logan stood at respectful attention, his law enforcement authority suddenly feeling small compared to what this woman had done in service to her country. Flynn Rodriguez and Bradley Morrison stood frozen, their earlier anger and confusion transformed into something more complex. They'd spent the entire day condescending to someone who operated at a level they couldn't even comprehend. Every dismissive comment, every assumption of incompetence, every moment of barely disguised contempt now echoed back with devastating clarity. "Ma'am," Derek Sanders said formally, his voice carrying decades of military respect, "I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. Everything I said today about strength and experience and who deserves to hold a Barrett, I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. We all were," Connor added quietly. "I tried to give you gloves like you were a child who needed help. Meanwhile, you were the person who saved 30 Marines with a shot I can't even imagine making." Amber Mitchell had tears streaming down her face, her earlier cattiness replaced by visible shame. "I called you adorable. I made fun of you for trying hard. Oh God, I'm so sorry." Lily wiped her own tears, her composure slowly returning. "You all made assumptions based on incomplete information. That's human nature. I let you make those assumptions because honestly, I was tired of being defined by my service record. I wanted to be just Lily today, just a woman facing her fears without the weight of expectations. But we turned that into harassment," Flynn said, his voice rough. "I grabbed your jacket. I got aggressive when you outshot me. I acted like your skill was somehow an insult to my expertise when really, I'm not fit to clean your rifle." "None of us are," Bradley added. "I've been shooting for 15 years, and I thought I was good. Then you put 5 shots into a half-inch group at 500 meters in conditions I used as an excuse not to even try. That's not just better. That's a completely different level of ability. We're approaching the moment that will change everything. Before we get there, do us a favor. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Someone who's been underestimated, dismissed, or told they don't belong. Sometimes people need to be reminded that quiet competence speaks louder than loud arrogance. Now, let's watch what happens next." The group stood in uncomfortable silence, everyone processing revelations that had transformed a simple training day into something far more significant. Mason Wright still held his challenge coin, looking at it with new understanding of its origin. Jasper had returned to his maintenance work, but kept glancing at Lily with the recognition of a fellow warrior who understood the cost of the quiet service she'd provided. It was Sheriff Logan who finally broke the silence with practical concern. "Ms. Dawson, does the Pentagon know you're here? I mean, if you're who they say you are, isn't there some security protocol about revealing classified operations?" Lily managed a small laugh, though it carried more sadness than humor. "I'm retired, Sheriff. Medically discharged after the IED incident. The classification doesn't end, but once you're out, they can't control where you go or what you do in your civilian life. As long as I don't actively compromise ongoing operations, they leave me alone." "Medically discharged," Dr. Grace repeated, her professional attention focusing on this detail. "May I ask about your injuries from the IED?" Lily hesitated, clearly weighing what to share. "Shrapnel damage to my left shoulder and back. Nothing that prevents normal function, but enough that I couldn't meet the physical standards for active sniper duty. Plus the PTSD evaluations determined I wasn't suitable for field deployment anymore." "And yet you came here to shoot the Barrett," Grace noted. "The same weapon system you used during the trauma that ended your career." "Exposure therapy," Lily replied, though apparently I picked a more public venue than my therapist recommended. The mention of therapy reminded everyone that despite the legendary status being attributed to her, Lily was still a human being dealing with very real psychological wounds. The Ghost 7 designation was starting to feel less like a cool military call sign and more like a burden this woman had been carrying alone. Derek made a decision. "Ms. Dawson, I'd like to officially invite you to complete the Barrett portion of this course. Not as a student, but as my co-instructor. These folks," he gestured to the assembled students, "came here to learn precision shooting. They won't find a better teacher than you." Lily looked uncertain. "I don't think that's what they signed up for." "It's exactly what we signed up for," Connor interjected. "We wanted to learn from the best. Turns out the best was here all along, and we were too stupid to recognize it." "I wouldn't say stupid," Lilias began. "I would," Bradley cut in. "We saw a small woman and assumed incompetence. That's not just stupid, it's prejudice. And you don't owe us anything, but if you're willing to teach, I promise I'll actually listen this time." Flynn nodded agreement. "Everything I thought I knew about precision shooting just got recalibrated. I'd be honored to learn from someone who's operated at your level." Lily looked around at the faces watching her, with expectations that had transformed completely from this morning. Instead of dismissal and condescension, she saw genuine respect mixed with appropriate humility. It was what she'd wanted at some level, even if the path to get here had been uncomfortable for everyone involved. "All right," she said finally, "but we do this my way. No showing off, no competition, just serious instruction in real technique. The Barrett isn't a toy, and it's not a measuring stick for ego. It's a tool that requires respect and genuine skill to use properly." "Yes, ma'am," came from multiple voices simultaneously. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Where there had been conflict and confusion, there was now something resembling unity of purpose. The students moved toward the area where the Barrett 50 cal waited, their energy completely different from the morning's casual approach. Now there was real attention, genuine focus, and the kind of seriousness that matched the weapon they were about to handle. Lily walked alongside them, and Mason Wright fell into step beside her. "Ma'am, those 30 Marines, we've stayed in touch over the years. We have a reunion every October 7th in honor of the day we didn't die. Would you consider joining us this year? There are men who'd give anything to meet Ghost 7 and say thank you in person." Lily's eyes went distant again. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. None of us were ready to almost die that day," Mason replied gently, "but it happened, and you saved us. Those men have families now, children who exist because you made an impossible shot. They deserve to know who gave them that gift." "I'll think about it," Lily promised, which was more than Mason had hoped for. As they reached the Barrett, Lily's entire demeanor shifted. She approached the weapon with visible tension, her earlier confidence replaced by something more complex. This wasn't just a rifle to her. It was a repository of memories, both triumphant and traumatic. Her hand reached out to touch the stock, then hesitated. "It's okay to be afraid," Dr. Grace said quietly from behind her. "Facing trauma isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway." Lily nodded, then completed the gesture, her hand settling on the Barrett, with the familiarity of someone who'd spent thousands of hours with this exact weapon system. She picked it up, the 30-pound weight no longer seeming excessive on her small frame. The rifle settled into her shoulder like it had been custom-built for her proportions, which in fact, the military version she'd used had been. "The Barrett M82A1, she began, her voice taking on the measured tone of an instructor, fires a .50 caliber BMG round at approximately 2,800 feet per second. At 1,000 meters, which is where most of you will never shoot in actual conditions, you're dealing with 473 inches of bullet drop in a no-win scenario." She paused, letting them absorb numbers that made several students' eyes widen. That's over 39 feet of drop. The bullet is arcing like a rainbow, and you have to account for that trajectory while also calculating wind drift, which at this distance can push your shot 6 feet off target with a mere 10-mile-per-hour crosswind. Add in temperature variations, altitude, the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, and humidity changes, and you're solving a physics problem that has dozens of variables. Connor raised his hand tentatively. "How do you keep track of all that?" "Practice," Lily replied. Thousands of hours of practice until the calculations become automatic. But more importantly, you develop intuition. You learn to read conditions not just with instruments, but with your eyes, your skin, even your breathing. The wind tells you stories if you learn its language. She demonstrated proper positioning, the specific way to load your skeletal structure, rather than relying on muscle strength to manage the massive recoil. The Barrett produces approximately 25 foot-pounds of free recoil energy. For comparison, a typical hunting rifle produces around 15. If you try to muscle through that force, you'll hurt yourself and throw off your shot. Instead, you become part of the weapon system, letting physics work with you rather than against you. For the next hour, Lily provided instruction that was light years beyond anything Derek normally taught in these courses. She covered advanced topics that most civilian shooters never encountered, drawing on years of operational experience to explain not just the how, but the why behind precision shooting techniques. Her patience with questions was notable, especially given how these same people had treated her earlier in the day. When it came time for actual shooting demonstrations, Lily set up for a 1,000-meter shot, the distance that had seemed like the ultimate challenge that morning, but now felt like a baseline given what they knew about her capabilities. She went through her calculations aloud, explaining each variable as she measured it. Wind at the firing position is 8 miles per hour from the northwest. At 500 meters, those flags show 10 miles per hour from the west. At the target, approximately 12 miles per hour west-southwest. So, I'm dealing with wind gradient, changing direction, and increasing velocity. That requires calculations that account for bullet flight time through different wind layers. She lay down behind the Barrett, settling into position with the fluid ease of someone who'd done this more times than she could count. Her breathing slowed. The 4-count pattern Mason had recognized earlier became audible in the quiet. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold. Combat breathing designed to lower heart rate and steady aim. Then she fired. The Barrett's report cracked across the range, massive and intimidating. The recoil looked violent to observers, but Lily absorbed it with practiced efficiency, already recovering to observe the hit before the sound had finished echoing off distant mountains. "Target," Derek confirmed through the spotting scope. "Dead center." Lily stood, cleared the weapon, and stepped back. "Now it's your turn. Remember, this isn't about matching my performance. It's about learning proper technique and respecting what this weapon can do. Treat it seriously. Stay within your limits and focus on fundamentals rather than trying to impress anyone." The students took turns with the Barrett, each one approaching with significantly more humility than they'd shown that morning. Bradley's shots were respectable but unremarkable. Flynn managed to hit the 1,000-meter target twice out of 5 shots, a performance that would have seemed impressive before, but now was correctly understood as merely competent. Connor surprised everyone by grouping 3 shots within a foot, suggesting genuine natural talent once he stopped trying to perform and started actually learning. Throughout it all, Lily provided patient instruction, correcting grip problems, explaining wind-reading techniques, and demonstrating the kind of teaching skill that only came from truly mastering a subject. There was no mockery in her corrections, no condescension in her explanations. She treated each student with the same professional respect, regardless of their earlier behavior. As the afternoon wore toward evening, and the course concluded, the group gathered for final debrief. The energy was completely different from that morning, transformed by revelation and education into something approaching camaraderie. "Before we end," Derek said, "I want to officially apologize again to Ms. Dawson. What happened today was unprofessional on multiple levels. We made assumptions that were both wrong and harmful. I'm implementing new policies for this academy to ensure we judge students by their performance rather than their appearance." "I appreciate that," Lily replied, "but I also want to acknowledge my part in today's confusion. I could have been more forthcoming about my background. I chose not to be because I wanted to avoid the attention that comes with my service record. That wasn't entirely fair to any of you." "No," Mason Wright interjected firmly. "You don't owe strangers your trauma history. The assumptions we made were our failure, not yours. You showed up, followed all the rules, and outperformed everyone here. The fact that we responded with hostility rather than respect says everything about our biases and nothing about your behavior." Several other students murmured agreement. The group was learning lessons that went far beyond precision shooting, uncomfortable truths about prejudice and assumption that would stay with them longer than any technical instruction. Mastery doesn't happen by accident. Whether you're pursuing advanced firearms training, specialized certifications in precision shooting, or navigating the complex legal landscape of weapon ownership and professional security work, expert guidance makes all the difference. Online courses from military veterans who've operated at the highest levels, legal consultation to ensure compliance with federal and state regulations, professional development programs that open doors to careers in law enforcement or private security. Knowledge is the foundation of competence, and competence is what separates amateurs from professionals in any field that demands excellence. As people began packing up equipment and preparing to leave, several approached Lily individually with personal apologies or questions. Connor asked about training programs for people interested in military sniper specialties. Dr. Grace exchanged contact information and offered again to help with PTSD treatment options. Even Amber Mitchell managed a genuine apology, acknowledging how her casual cruelty had been thoughtless and hurtful. Flynn Rodriguez waited until most others had left before approaching Lily with visible discomfort. "Ma'am, I grabbed you during the confrontation earlier. That was assault, and it was completely inexcusable. I let my ego and confusion override basic decency. If you want to press charges, I'll understand." Lily considered him for a long moment. "I don't want to press charges, but I do want you to think about why your first response to being outperformed was aggression. That's a problem that goes beyond today." "Yes, ma'am," Flynn replied. "I've already been thinking about it. I didn't like what I saw in myself today." Bradley Morrison was last, his earlier swagger completely gone. "I don't have a good excuse for how I acted. I saw someone I thought was weak, and it made me feel strong to dismiss you. That's ugly, and I'm ashamed of it. For what it's worth, you're the most skilled shooter I've ever witnessed, and today was humbling in ways I needed." "Thank you for saying that," Lily replied. "We all have biases. The question is whether we're willing to recognize and change them." As the sun began setting over the Montana mountains, casting long shadows across the now empty range, Lily found herself alone with the Barrett one final time. She picked it up, feeling its weight and balance, remembering both the triumph of Ramadi and the tragedy of Marcus. The weapon had defined so much of her adult life, had been the tool through which she'd saved lives and watched life end. "You did good today," Jasper said, appearing from the equipment shed with his quiet way of materializing when needed. "Marcus would be proud." "You knew him?" Lily asked, surprised. "Ghost units talk to each other, even across theaters. I heard about his sacrifice. He was one of the good ones." "The best," Lily agreed quietly. "You planning to take Derek up on his instructor offer?" Jasper asked. "Academy could use someone who knows what they're doing, instead of just talking about it." "I don't know," Lily admitted. "I came here to face my fears, and I did that. But teaching means explaining things I've tried hard to leave behind. Leaving things behind isn't the same as healing from them," Jasper observed. "Sometimes sharing the burden makes it lighter. Those students today learned more than shooting. They learned about assumptions and respect and the costs of service. That's valuable teaching." Lily looked at the Barrett in her hands, then out at the range where she'd spent the day demonstrating skills she'd worked so hard to develop and then tried so hard to forget. "Maybe you're right." "I usually am," Jasper said with a slight smile. "It's the benefit of being old and stubborn. You get to pretend wisdom and obstinacy are the same thing. He turned to head back to the shed, then paused. Ghost 7 saved a lot of lives. Maybe it's time for Lily Dawson to save one more, her own. As he disappeared into the building, Lily stood alone in the fading light, the Barrett's familiar weight in her hands, and for the first time since Marcus died, she felt something that wasn't just pain when she held this weapon. There was still grief, still trauma, still the weight of impossible shots and impossible losses. But there was also possibility. She thought about Mason's invitation to meet the Marines from Ramadi, about Derek's offer to teach, about Connor's obvious desire to learn, about all the students who'd seen her, not as Ghost 7, the legendary operator, but as Lily Dawson, the teacher who'd patiently corrected their grip and explained wind reading with genuine care for their learning. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She set down the Barrett carefully and pulled it out, seeing an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. For a moment, she considered not answering. Her retirement was supposed to mean freedom from these kinds of calls, but muscle memory and ingrained sense of duty made her thumb hit accept. Dawson. Sergeant Dawson, came a voice she didn't recognize, but whose tone was unmistakably Pentagon. This is Special Operations Command. We have a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires specialized consultation from someone with your unique experience. I'm retired, Lily said automatically. We're aware. This isn't a recall to active duty. We're requesting your expertise as a civilian consultant on a time-sensitive operation. 3 American operators are compromised behind enemy lines. Intel suggests hostile sniper team with equipment matching Russian Spetsnaz capabilities. Extraction window is 72 hours. Lily felt her heartbeat accelerate, old instincts responding to the urgency in the voice. Why me? There are other qualified operators. Target environment requires precision engagements exceeding 2,800 meters in mountain terrain with variable conditions. Your Ramadi record suggests you're one of very few operators with confirmed capability at that range under combat stress. She closed her eyes, knowing what was coming before the words were spoken. We're not ordering you, Sergeant. You're a civilian. But those 3 operators have families waiting for them. We're asking if you'll help bring them home. The silence stretched out while Lily thought about Marcus, about the 30 Marines from Ramadi, about Connor and all the other young people who looked at military service with idealism that hadn't yet been tempered by reality, about the weight of skills that only she possessed and the responsibility that came with them. Send me the mission parameters, she finally said. I'll review and provide recommendations. Thank you, Sergeant. Files are being transmitted to your secure email now. We'll need your assessment within 12 hours. The call ended. Lily stood holding her phone, looking at the Barrett on the bench beside her, and realized that maybe retirement wasn't about running from who she'd been. Maybe it was about choosing when and how to use skills that had been purchased at such high cost. She picked up the Barrett one more time, felt its familiar weight settle into her shoulder, and thought about all the impossible shots she'd made, and the one impossible shot that had cost her everything. The weapon had taken Marcus from her, but it had also saved 30 Marines, had protected people who never knew they were in danger, had been the tool through which she'd served something larger than herself. All right, Marcus, she said quietly to the Montana sky. One more mission, then maybe I can finally let you rest. She carried the Barrett toward the equipment shed, her stride purposeful in a way it hadn't been in 3 years. Behind her, the range stretched out into gathering darkness, its targets waiting silently for the next day's shooters. But Lily was done waiting, done hiding, done pretending that Ghost 7 had died with Marcus in that IED blast. Some skills couldn't be unlearned, some duties couldn't be abandoned, and some shots, no matter how impossible, still needed to be made. Tomorrow she'd review the Pentagon's files. She'd analyze the terrain, calculate the probabilities, and make her recommendation about whether this mission was feasible or suicide. But tonight, she'd sleep for the first time in 3 years without the dream about trying and failing to hold Marcus as he died. Because she finally understood that honoring his memory wasn't about running from what they'd done together. It was about continuing the mission they'd shared, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, using skills that few possessed and fewer still mastered, operating in the shadows so that others could live in the light. Ghost 7 wasn't dead. She'd just been resting, and now she was coming back. The secure email arrived at 11:43 p.m., marked with encryption protocols Lily hadn't seen since her discharge. She sat in her small apartment, the one-bedroom place she'd rented after leaving the service because it was cheap and anonymous and asked nothing of her except monthly payments. Her laptop screen cast blue light across her face as she entered the decryption keys she'd memorized but never thought she'd use again. The mission file opened with clinical precision. Satellite imagery showed mountainous terrain along the Ukrainian border, harsh country where winter came early and stayed late. 3 operators, call signs Archer 6, Falcon 2, and Nomad 9, had been conducting reconnaissance on suspected weapons smuggling routes when their position was compromised. Current intel suggested they were pinned down in abandoned infrastructure, surrounded by hostile forces that included at least 2 trained counter-sniper elements. Lily studied the topographical maps with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years reading terrain for tactical advantage. The target area sat in a valley system with limited approaches, surrounded by ridgelines that offered excellent overwatch positions. Exactly the kind of place where a skilled sniper could control the entire battlefield or be trapped by someone better positioned. The enemy sniper team's estimated capabilities made her pause. Russian Spetsnaz training, potentially equipped with Orsis T-5000 rifles capable of engaging targets beyond 1,500 meters. These weren't amateur insurgents. They were professionals who understood precision shooting as well as she did. Her phone rang at midnight. Same Washington number. "Sergeant Dawson, have you reviewed the materials?" The voice was different this time, older, carrying the weight of command authority that came from decades of making life-and-death decisions. "I have," Lily confirmed. "The terrain is challenging but manageable. The enemy capabilities are concerning but not insurmountable. The real problem is insertion. Getting a sniper into effective range without compromising the rescue operation will be nearly impossible with conventional approaches. We're aware. That's why we're not proposing conventional approaches." A pause, then. "How would you do it, Sergeant? If this were your mission, what would Ghost 7 recommend?" Lily pulled up the satellite imagery again, zooming in on approaches that military planners would typically dismiss as too difficult or too dangerous. Her mind began working through possibilities, calculating vectors and probabilities with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times under pressure that made tonight's phone call feel leisurely. "High-altitude insertion," she said slowly, thinking aloud. "Halo jump from 30,000 feet. Oxygen-assisted descent to minimize radar signature. Land here," she marked a spot on the digital map, "approximately 4,000 meters from the target area. Night movement through this drainage system to reach this ridgeline by dawn. That position offers sight lines to both the trapped operators and likely enemy sniper positions. That's a 14-hour operation in hostile territory with minimal support," the voice observed. "And the shot distances you're describing exceed 2,800 meters under optimal conditions. In mountain terrain with variable winds, we're talking about shots that very few operators could even attempt." "I know," Lily said quietly. "I've made them before." Another pause, longer this time. "Sergeant Dawson, I'm going to be direct with you. We have 3 men who will die if they're not extracted within 72 hours. We have enemy snipers preventing conventional rescue, and we have exactly 1 person with demonstrated capability to neutralize those threats at the required distances. You retired for very good reasons, and we respect that. But right now, those 3 operators and their families are depending on skills that only you possess." Lily thought about Marcus, about how he'd died protecting her, about how she'd spent 3 years hiding from the weapon that defined her service, about the 30 Marines from Ramadi and Mason Wright's invitation to meet the men whose lives she'd saved, about Connor Hayes and his youthful idealism that hadn't yet been tempered by impossible choices. "If I do this," she said carefully, "I need guarantees. No media coverage, no public recognition, no ceremonies. I go in, I take the shots, I get out, and then I go back to being Lily Dawson, IT specialist who's trying to figure out how to live with what she's done." "Agreed. This operation will remain classified at the highest levels. Your involvement will never be officially acknowledged." "And I want something else," Lily continued. "Montana Precision Rifle Academy. There's an instructor position open. I want Pentagon support to establish a veterans scholarship program there, fully funded, for combat vets dealing with PTSD who need to reconnect with their skills in a safe environment." She could almost hear the smile in the voice's response. "That can be arranged. We'll have the paperwork started immediately. Does this mean you're accepting the mission?" Lily looked at the Barrett rifle case leaning against her apartment wall, the weapon she'd brought home from the range and hadn't put away yet. 3 years ago, she had sworn never to fire it again. Today, she'd faced it and survived. Tomorrow, it might save 3 lives. "Send the insertion details," she said. "Ghost 7 is coming out of retirement." What you just witnessed is only part of Lily's story. There are more accounts like this, more moments where the system got it wrong and one person proved it right. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss them. These are the stories that need to be told. Now, let's see how this ends. 48 hours later, Lily stood on the tarmac of a classified airfield in Poland, preparing for a jump that would have been considered reckless even by special operations standards. The MC-130 Combat Talon waited in the pre-dawn darkness, its engines creating wind that cut through multiple layers of cold weather gear she wore under her jumpsuit. The mission team was minimal by design, 2 pilots who didn't ask questions, 1 jump master who'd reviewed her qualifications with raised eyebrows but said nothing, and Lily, carrying equipment that weighed nearly 80 pounds including the Barrett, ammunition, survival gear, and the sophisticated electronics necessary for targeting at extreme range. 30,000 feet in winter conditions, the jump master observed, running final checks on her oxygen system. At that altitude, you're looking at -40 degrees before wind chill. Equipment failure means you're dead before you pull your chute. "I know," Lily replied, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask she was already wearing for pre-breathing protocols. "And the landing zone is approximately the size of a football field, surrounded by rocks that will kill you just as dead as hitting the ground at terminal velocity." "I know. So, naturally, you volunteered for this completely insane operation." The jump master shook his head. "Special operations types are all crazy, but you must be extra special to jump alone into hostile territory, to take shots that most people think are impossible." Lily thought about Marcus, about the IED that had killed him, about 3 operators she'd never met who were counting on her to do something that statistical analysis said had maybe a 30% chance of success. "Someone has to be crazy enough to try the impossible," she said. "Otherwise those 3 men die waiting for someone sane to save them." The loadmaster gave her a sharp nod of respect. "Fair enough. Green light in 15 minutes. Try not to get dead, Ghost 7. The world needs more people crazy enough to try impossible things." The jump itself was everything the briefings had warned, and worse. At 30,000 feet, the air was thin enough that even with oxygen supplementation, her brain felt sluggish and distant. The cold was beyond anything she'd experienced, a physical presence that seemed to reach through multiple insulation layers to find her skin. And the darkness was absolute, broken only by stars that seemed impossibly close and bright in the thin atmosphere. Lily fell through 3 miles of empty air, her body automatically maintaining the stable position that would keep her from tumbling into an uncontrolled spin. The Barrett case was strapped to her chest, aerodynamically designed, but still creating drag that complicated the descent. Her altimeter counted down through numbers that represented decreasing chances to deploy her chute if something went wrong. At 5,000 feet, she pulled, the canopy deployed with a shock that would have been painful if adrenaline hadn't already numbed her to everything except the mission. She grabbed the steering toggles and began navigating toward the landing zone, a small clearing identified from satellite imagery that hopefully didn't contain any surprises like rocks or fallen trees that would turn her landing into a fatal crash. The ground came up fast in the darkness. Lily rolled with the impact, years of training converting forward momentum into a tumble that bruised but didn't break. She was down, alive, in hostile territory with 80 pounds of equipment and approximately 4,000 meters to cover before dawn. She buried her parachute and jump gear, covered the evidence with rocks and brush, then began the approach march that would take her to shooting position. Every step was calculated, every sound evaluated, every shadow assessed for threat potential. This was the part of sniper operations that civilians never understood, the hours of patient movement through terrain where discovery meant immediate death. 3 hours into the march, her radio crackled with encrypted communication. "Ghost 7, this is command. Operators report enemy forces tightening perimeter. Estimate 12 hours before position is overrun. Status? On schedule," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "ETA to firing position 6 hours. Maintain radio silence unless critical updates." The terrain was exactly as the satellite imagery had shown, but somehow worse in person. Rock fields that required careful navigation to avoid twisted ankles. Drainage systems that were partially frozen, creating ice patches that could send her tumbling down slopes. And always the awareness that enemy patrols could be anywhere, that her presence could be revealed by a single mistake. Dawn found her on the ridgeline she'd identified during mission planning, settling into a position that offered sight lines to both the trapped operators and the most likely enemy sniper locations. She assembled the Barrett with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this under worse conditions, each component clicking into place with familiar precision. The target area came into focus through her scope, the abandoned factory complex where the 3 operators were trapped, surrounded by hostile forces. And there, on a ridge approximately 2,800 meters away, a position that showed all the signs of professional sniper setup. Camouflaged hide, carefully constructed fields of fire, discipline that kept the occupant invisible even to her trained observation. Lily settled in to wait. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon, the ability to remain motionless for hours while calculating, observing, preparing for the one moment when action would be required. Her breathing slowed to the 4-count combat rhythm. Her heartbeat steadied to the controlled cadence that came from years of training, and her mind began working through the ballistic calculations that would determine whether 3 men lived or died. 2,800 meters, approximately 9,184 feet. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 seconds, time enough for wind to push it, for gravity to arc it, for the Earth's rotation to deflect it through Coriolis effect. She was shooting uphill at a target that was also elevated, creating angle calculations that most people would need computers to solve. Lily did them in her head, numbers flowing through consciousness with the automatic precision of someone who had made similar calculations under fire more times than she could count. Wind at her position, wind at mid-range, wind at the target. Temperature gradients, humidity variations, altitude effects on bullet velocity. All of it synthesized into adjustment values that would either save 3 lives or reveal her position to an enemy that would immediately respond with overwhelming force. At 1400 hours, movement in the enemy sniper position. Just a slight shift, barely visible, but enough to confirm occupancy and provide the targeting reference she needed. Lily's crosshairs settled on a point that represented her best calculation of where a human head would be based on the movement pattern she'd observed. Her finger found the trigger, 4-count breathing, in, hold, out, hold, in, hold, out, hold. On the exhale, between heartbeats, when her body was as still as human physiology allowed, she pressed. The Barrett's report echoed across the valley like thunder. 2,800 meters away, movement in the enemy hide stopped abruptly and permanently. Lily was already cycling the bolt, acquiring the secondary position where the enemy's spotter would be located. One more shot, one more calculation, one more impossibly distant target that represented the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The second shot followed the first by maybe 8 seconds. Then Lily was moving, abandoning her position before enemy forces could triangulate her location and respond with their own precision fire. The shots were perfect or they weren't. She'd either eliminated the threat or revealed her position for nothing. Either way, staying in place meant death. Ghost 7 command, we have confirmation both targets are down. Extraction team is moving to operator position. Outstanding shooting. Lily didn't respond, focused entirely on moving through terrain that was now actively hostile. Behind her, she could hear enemy forces mobilizing, hear the distinctive sounds of vehicles and shouted commands in Russian. They knew someone had eliminated their sniper team. They knew approximately where the shots had come from, and they were coming to find whoever had just disrupted their operation. The next 6 hours were pure survival, moving through terrain that offered minimal cover, avoiding enemy patrols that were actively searching for her, navigating by compass and terrain features because GPS signals could be tracked. This was the part of sniper operations that training could prepare for, but never fully replicate. The psychological pressure of being alone in hostile territory with no backup and no rescue available if something went wrong. At dusk, she reached the extraction point, a clearing barely large enough for the helicopter that was supposed to meet her. She checked her watch, 15 minutes until pickup. 15 minutes to hold this position against any enemy forces that might have tracked her here. 15 minutes between mission success and dying alone in Ukrainian mountains because she'd volunteered for an operation that sane people would have refused. The helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, a Black Hawk flying nap of the earth through the valleys to avoid radar detection. Lily sprinted from her concealment position, the Barrett case bouncing against her back, as she ran across open ground that made every tactical instinct scream danger. Hands reached down from the helicopter's door, pulling her aboard with efficiency that spoke to extensive practice. "Welcome aboard, Ghost 7, the crew chief shouted over the engine noise. "3 very grateful operators want to buy you a drink when we get back to base." Lily collapsed against the helicopter's bulkhead, exhaustion hitting now that immediate danger had passed. 2,800 meters, 2 perfect shots under conditions that pushed equipment and human capability to absolute limits. 3 operators alive who would have died without her intervention. She thought about Marcus, about how he'd died protecting her, and realized that maybe honoring his memory wasn't about running from what they'd done together. Maybe it was about continuing to use skills that few possessed, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The 3 operators were waiting when the helicopter landed. Archer 6, a lean man in his 30s with the weathered look of someone who had spent years in difficult places. Falcon 2, younger, his face showing the stress of 3 days surrounded by enemies. And Nomad 9, the team leader, who approached Lily with the kind of respect usually reserved for senior officers. "Ma'am," he said formally, "you just pulled off 2 of the finest shots I've ever witnessed. 2,800 meters in mountain winds, eliminating threats we couldn't even locate despite knowing they were out there. We owe you our lives." "You don't owe me anything," Lily replied, exhaustion making her voice rough. "You'd have done the same for me." "Maybe," Archer 6 interjected, "but we wouldn't have made those shots. That was legendary-level sniper work. The kind of thing people talk about but rarely see." Lily thought about the Montana range, about Connor Hayes and his eagerness to learn, about Mason Wright and the 30 Marines from Ramadi, about all the people whose lives had been touched by impossible shots made by someone they'd initially dismissed as insignificant. "It's what I do," she said simply. "It's what Ghost 7 has always done." 2 weeks later, Lily stood in the Montana Precision Rifle Academy, now officially contracted as lead instructor for advanced precision shooting. The scholarship program was already established, funded through channels that didn't officially exist, but that ensured combat veterans dealing with PTSD would have access to training that helped them reconnect with skills in safe, supportive environments. Her first advanced class included familiar faces. Connor Hayes had signed up immediately, his earlier condescension replaced by genuine hunger to learn from someone who operated at the level he aspired to reach. Mason Wright was there too, along with 3 of the Marines from Ramadi who'd made the trip specifically to train with the woman who'd saved their lives. Even Bradley Morrison and Flynn Rodriguez had returned, both men visibly humbled by the lessons they'd learned about assumptions and respect. They approached the course with the seriousness of students who understood they were in the presence of genuine expertise. "Before we start," Lily said, standing before the assembled students with the Barrett resting on the bench beside her, "I want to establish some ground rules. This course isn't about ego. It's not about proving you're the best. It's about developing skills that might someday save lives, your own or someone else's. That responsibility requires humility, discipline, and constant awareness that these weapons aren't toys." She picked up the Barrett, feeling its familiar weight settle into her shoulder. 3 years ago, this weapon had represented trauma she couldn't face. Today, it represented capability she could share with people who needed to understand not just how to shoot, but why precision mattered. "The shots I'm going to teach you to make are difficult," she continued. "Some of them will feel impossible, but I'm living proof that impossible just means nobody's figured out how to do it yet. We're going to learn together, support each other, and remember that true strength isn't about being the best. It's about being reliable when it matters most." The students nodded with genuine understanding. They'd all learned hard lessons about assumptions and respect. Now they were ready to learn the real skills that separated competent shooters from operators who made impossible shots under conditions that would break most people. As the class progressed through the day, moving from fundamentals to advanced techniques, Lily found herself thinking about Marcus less with pain and more with gratitude. He'd been the best spotter in the unit, had saved her life more times than she could count, had died protecting her when circumstances turned against them. But he had also taught her that skills carried responsibility, that capability demanded use in service of something larger than personal survival. During a break, Mason Wright approached with a photograph. The reunion is in 3 weeks, he said. All 30 of us will be there, plus families. That's approximately 90 people who exist because you made an impossible shot. They'd all like to meet you, if you're willing. Lily looked at the photo, seeing Marines she'd saved but never met, seeing wives and children and parents who'd gotten their loved ones back, because Ghost 7 had been positioned on a Ramadi rooftop, with a Barrett and the skills to use it. The weight of that responsibility had felt crushing for 3 years. Today it felt different, not lighter exactly, but more balanced. "I'll be there," she said. "Tell them Ghost 7 is finally ready to meet the people she's been protecting from the shadows." As the sun set over Montana, casting orange light across the range where Lily had faced her trauma and found her purpose, she stood alone with the Barrett one more time. The weapon that had defined her military career, that had saved countless lives, that had cost her Marcus and 3 years of running from memories too painful to face directly. She raised it to her shoulder, felt the familiar weight settle into place, and thought about all the impossible shots she'd made, and the ones still to come. Because Ghost 7 wasn't just a call sign, it was a commitment to use extraordinary skills in service of people who needed protection. The target was 1,000 meters away. She made the shot without conscious thought, muscle memory and training converging into action that looked effortless but represented years of dedication and sacrifice. Perfect placement, center mass, exactly where she'd intended. "Still got it," Jasper's voice came from behind her. The old ranger had been watching from his usual position near the equipment shed. "Marcus would be proud." "I hope so," Lily replied. "I'm finally doing what he taught me, not running from the skills we developed together, but using them to protect people who need protecting." "That's all any of us can do," Jasper observed. "Use what we have to help who we can. Some people paint, some people build. You make impossible shots that save lives. It's a gift, even when it feels like a burden." Lily nodded, understanding for the first time that maybe both things could be true simultaneously. The weight of her capabilities was real, but so was the value of using them well. She'd spent 3 years trying to escape Ghost 7. Now she was learning to integrate that identity with Lily Dawson, to be both the legendary sniper and the woman who taught students and struggled with PTSD and was trying to figure out how to honor Marcus while still living her own life. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Pentagon Special Operations Command. Another situation developing somewhere in the world where 3 operators or 30 Marines or countless civilians needed someone capable of making shots that shouldn't be possible. She looked at the message, then at the Barrett, then at the range where students were packing up equipment and discussing the day's lessons with genuine enthusiasm. 3 years ago, she would have deleted the message and pretended she'd never seen it. Today, she opened it and began reading mission parameters for operations that officially didn't exist. Because impossible shots were what Ghost 7 did, and Lily Dawson was finally ready to be both the woman who'd lost everything to military service and the operator whose skills saved lives that would otherwise be lost. The Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as Lily walked back toward the academy building, the Barrett case in one hand and her phone in the other. Tomorrow she'd teach Connor Hayes about wind reading at extreme distances. Next week, she'd meet the Marines from Ramadi and their families. Next month, she'd deploy on another classified operation that would never be acknowledged, but that would mean someone's husband or daughter or parent came home alive. She'd spent 3 years running from Ghost 7. Now she was learning that you didn't have to choose between being the legend and being human. You could be both, carrying the weight of impossible capabilities while still finding meaning in teaching and healing and connecting with people who understood that service came in many forms. "Real warriors don't advertise," she'd told her students that morning. "They serve quietly, they share what they know, and they show up when needed because someone has to be willing to do the hard things." Ghost 7 had always understood that. Now Lily Dawson did too. And somewhere in the Montana sky, she imagined Marcus watching and approving of the woman she was becoming. Not the operator who'd made the Ramadi shot, not the broken veteran who'd run from her trauma, but someone who integrated both identities into a person who could face impossible challenges while still remaining human enough to cry, to teach, to heal, and to keep showing up when impossible shots needed to be made. The Barrett rested against her shoulder as she walked, its weight familiar and no longer frightening. Just a tool, extraordinarily capable, yes, but ultimately just metal and precision engineering, given purpose only by the person who knew how to use it well. And Lily Dawson, formerly Sergeant First Class Lily Dawson, formerly Ghost 7 of the most elite sniper unit America had ever fielded, knew how to use it very well indeed. The impossible shots would keep coming. The challenges would continue. The weight of capability would never fully disappear. But she'd learned that carrying that weight was easier when you stopped running from it and started using it to make the world safer for people who deserve protection. 3,200 meters, 2,800 meters, 1,000 meters on a Montana range while teaching students who'd learn not to judge by appearances. All impossible until someone proved they weren't. Ghost 7 had always specialized in proving the impossible was merely difficult, and she was just getting started.